We were asked to talk today about bravery and learning. Of course, when we say learning, there's a lot more than the act of knowing. Real learning is in itself brave. We don't mean the bravery that it takes to show up to class or to take a test, even though for some of you that might be brave. You see, deep transformational learning takes place when we change how we interact with our worlds. As educators, this means our true purpose is not just to help our students know the answer, it's about the journey that it takes to get there. So, of course, it's a lofty thing to say that we want to transform students. What is transformational learning? First, we have to embrace the individual. I want to pose a question to you all. How do we embrace the individual when we treat our students as empty vessels, as Freire says? Second, I think it's important that we embrace that in the process of learning, our students' worlds are changing around them. They begin to see what was once invisible. This type of world-changing learning requires our students to engage on a deeper level. As David Koob describes, critical to creating this is engaging our students actively in their learning and in the reflection process that follows. James Zoll tells us that this cycle is not just a personal preference, but a biological structure. The brain and our students literally crave this type of engaging learning. This isn't to say that learning isn't scary. Traditional learning in Freire's model rejects some of the notions of reflection and integration. So when we say that we need to engage our students in transformational learning, this type of engagement is critical. As an example, in my University 100 class, we do not simply ask our students to know the policy or to know the strategy of the day. We ask them to engage in reflecting on how it affects their larger worldview. Now, it is important to recognize that the cycle alone does not provide for a remedy to fear. We propose that the way that this cycle is used is critical to understanding the student experience of that fear. Now, imagine for a second Plato's classic metaphor of the cave. In the metaphor, the person chained inside the cave only knows the world of shadows cast against the wall by the fire. When we show our students a different way of seeing their world, they literally are exposed to a new way of seeing things. When we show them this different way, their understanding changes. Why is this so hard? What's so difficult about it? The answer is fear. Much like in the cave, the unknown is frightening to our students. It creates literal anxieties for some, but assuredly for all of them, there's some level of uncertainty that comes along when we ask them to see the unknown. For real learning to occur, we ask our students to bravely embrace this unknown, what we cannot already see. The real question is, how can we do this? The answer is that learning, when we change our worldview, is not just a process that asks the learner to be brave, but us as educators to be brave as well. You see, Freire describes to us that learning and knowledge is an intoxicating power, one that requires us to be brave to give up. You see, change isn't just hard for our students. We're asking you to be brave. Become a partner in fear and in bravery. You see, the funny thing about bravery is we don't need to do it alone. So try some transformational learning. Create opportunities for your students to engage in the process, and create opportunities for them to explore how it affects their larger worldview. Listen for the individual, and stop trying to fill our empty vessels with knowledge.
Merriam-Webster defines brave as having or showing courage. Ryan talked a little bit about how bravery and learning are partners in crime, like the dynamic duo, my favorite superhero set, Batman and Robin. Like that famous duo, I want to talk about another duo of my own, emotions and change, and how they are a part of learning. Ask yourself, what do bravery and emotions have to do with learning? Think back to the first time you learned how to do something. Think about how you felt. I have a very clear memory of the first time I learned how to tie my shoes. This guy was on the screen, and I'm talking about the television screen in my aunt's house. So I was sitting there watching Timmy the Tooth, which, by the way, I didn't remember what Timmy looked like until creating this presentation. And I was sitting there watching, and suddenly I tied my shoe. And I got up very excitedly, and I went, and I was yelling throughout the house, Aunt Rennie, where are you, where are you? She's like, what, Travis, what? I was like, I tied my shoe for the first time. And it was really exciting. But what I remember most is not necessarily how I looped the string and how I pulled at the end. But what I remember is that feeling, that joy, that feeling of happiness that came over me, and how excited I was. So we all have these stories and experiences, whether they happened 15 years ago or yesterday, about how we learned something new for the first time. And I'm sure right now, at least I believe, I could ask you in the audience, we could walk around the room, and we could talk about how we felt the very first time we learned how to do something new. And that feeling of joy, of happiness, of excitement, because it's fun to learn new things. Another way that emotions impact our learning is when they lead us astray. How many March Madness fans are in the room? A couple? Very good. So, when you fill out your bracket for the first time, did you find yourself saying, oh, I have a feeling that Harvard is going to win. I have a feeling, which no one had that feeling. Just kidding. I have a feeling that Louisville is going to do well. So, I guess my question is, what is that feeling? We do not go through life without being emotionally connected or feeling things. Why should learning be any different? James Zoll, he said that ultimately we are at the mercy of our feelings. And if we are ever to become artful teachers, we must attend to this battle for attention. We must find some way to encourage our learners to want to use their reason. And now on to the other part of the dynamic duo. This is change. As Ryan spoke earlier, the traditional way education has been done does not take into consideration bravery. What is brave about standing in front of a group of students and telling them what they need to do? Trying something new, looking at things a different way, not being able to anticipate an outcome? Now that's scary. Who recalls the first time they talked about taking the training wheels off their bike? That is terrifying. The idea that here I've been for several weeks, some of us years, we've been riding our bikes successfully, having a good time, riding down the street, visiting friends. But what does it look like? How does it make you feel when someone tells you that, oh, I think it's time for you to change that? It's really hard to think about the way you do something and you successfully can do it that way for a long time, and then someone tells you, oh, it's time to talk about doing it a different way. That's really scary. So the idea is that why don't you want to take them off? It is our natural instinct as human beings to survive. In order to do that, we must be in control, or so we tell ourselves. When you remove the training wheels, we no longer have as much control as what we're used to. We're afraid of losing that control. So let's talk a little bit about a student affairs real-world example. Imagine that I am the supervisor for homecoming on my college or university campus. What happens when I no longer MC the homecoming variety show? What happens when a student or a pair of students does it? I lose control of the show. Would I lose my job if the students said or did something inappropriate? I'm afraid of what might happen when I can't control what is going on. But are the students learning from not doing it themselves? On the other hand, if I MC the event, we know that everything will run smoothly, of course. The show will start promptly at 7, and it will end immediately at 9 o'clock. The only hiccup would be a burnt-out light bulb. Great show, right? But I wonder if something was missing. Oh, that's right. What did the students learn? Fear and desire for control prevent learning. It requires bravery to make a change in the way we are. It requires bravery to make a change in the way we, student affairs professionals, go about helping our students. As we aim to facilitate learning, we must structure the environment in a way that is about the students, not us.
Bravery in learning is different for everyone. As educators, we have tools to help us navigate this balance and promote learning to the best of our ability. Marsha Baxter Magolda created a practical tool called the Learning Partnerships Model to help us promote an environment of learning. This model is based on a 20-year longitudinal study she conducted. With using this model, we can do our best to help our students be brave in the learning process. Two of the aspects of this model is to validate our students' capacity to know and portray knowledge as complex and socially constructed. Now, off the bat, this doesn't seem like too much of a challenge of bravery, but one thing I do as a student affairs professional or paraprofessional is facilitate bystander intervention programs for sexual assault prevention. Sometimes this can get a little tricky. Very often the conversation shifts to victim blaming or false reporting. As a facilitator, sometimes I really just want to shut down the conversation and go on a rant about victim blaming and how it only perpetuates the problem and false reporting is not as common as perceived and so forth. But instead, it takes a certain amount of bravery on my part as a facilitator to let people share their opinions, validate them, which does not mean agree, and then have others potentially share a dissenting opinion or share my knowledge in a way that does not attempt to shame. The reason I feel I can't shut them down is very much so related to bravery and learning. If I shut them down, have they learned to speak their minds, share their opinions? Have they learned that our culture lends to these thoughts? No. They've probably learned to not bring it up in front of people like me. And with that, the conversation stops, and so does the potential for learning. Another two aspects of the Learning Partnerships Model are situating the learning and the learner's experience, and self is central to knowledge construction. If you have taken a risk that required a great amount of bravery for you, did you succeed or did you fail? If you failed, taking a big risk again is going to be that much more difficult. Knowing our students' prior experiences is incredibly important for understanding when to challenge and when to support. We must remember that this is different for everyone. Scripts, boxes, social constructions, all of these factors play into bravery and learning. Merida was not brave because people or herself thought she could shoot arrows, ride horses, and save the day. It had a great deal to do with her identities. Perhaps for our students, taking the lead on a task is something others or themselves don't think is possible. And our motivation or willingness to admit when we struggled is enough for these students to decide to take that risk. The last two aspects of the Learning Partnerships Model are defining learning as mutually constructing meaning and sharing authority and expertise. So here's a question. What takes more bravery? Giving up some control when you already have it, or trying to gain some control when you feel you have none? Of course, the answer is both. It depends on the person, but for a student affairs professional and the students they're working with, this can be an incredibly difficult partnership to balance. Ryan talked a lot about that partnership, and sharing can be hard. Sometimes harder for the person in charge. That loss of control that Travis touched on is very important. Sharing and being in a partnership means that you cannot be the only one in control. It takes bravery on both parts to really embrace partnership. The Learning Partnerships Model helps us to understand students in the environments that promote learning, perhaps consider their emotions like fear, loss of control that Zoll talks about. But that doesn't necessarily make learning easier. In my experience, learning about who I am and coming to the conclusion that my way of seeing the world is just that, my way of seeing the world, has been incredibly difficult at some points. I've cried, I've laughed, I've cried again. I've been known to say, if you're not crying, you're not learning. And no, that doesn't mean go make your students cry, but it lends itself to my personal experience of really having difficulty sometimes being brave. Creating an environment using models such as this one doesn't make learning less scary, it makes it easier to be brave. To be brave is to learn. Thank you.